Welcome to Intersection Magazine podcast. This week we are broadcasting live from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Later on we will be moving on to Zanzibar. But we got this opportunity actually through a partnership with Kotani Pay. The plan is to, of course, cover as much as possible the Tanzania tech and innovation ecosystem. So we hope that you will enjoy the conversations we'll be having. This episode is really just to give you a rough idea where we're going with this and what we're planning to do. Of course, share some insights in terms of what Kotani Pay has to offer as a partner. And then give you some summaries as from an image that I was sent by one of the people that hopefully we'll be interviewing and talking to. It's a graphical image describing the Tanzania tech and innovation ecosystem, which I think is important to discuss. So we hope you enjoy this episode. So in this episode, I wanted to share with you a few things about our partner, Kotani Pay, who we're partnering with in this visit. Kotani Pay is pretty much an on-ramp, off-ramp platform. We're based in Africa. What on-ramp and off-ramp means is pretty much interaction where you have your cryptocurrencies move either from exchanges or from one currency to another. That's what's called on-ramping and off-ramping, when you move your cryptocurrencies to and then from various exchanges and I guess different payment platforms or applications. And they usually provide these services through an API, an application interface. And they have several use cases that they meet or they provide. One of them is remittance, which is a $1 billion market. Forex arbitrage, which is basically trade or movement of forex from one person to another for profit. And then there's lending, there's insurance, and these are all applications of the system. There's savings, there's social protection for, as we later described, for NGOs that need to move money when they have certain users, or for what some people call universal basic income, which is a new concept that many countries are beginning to explore. And then, of course, business financing and gig work, where people basically have ability to receive payment for the services they provide in what people call the gig economy, where you may have a preference of receiving your money through cryptocurrency that's probably a bit more stable than your local currency. So those are some of the applications that Kotani Pay makes available to us. I just wanted to let you guys know about that service. I met the director when I was visiting Kenya, and we had some interesting conversations. So if you get some time, please do listen to our conversation that we had with Felix Macharia. And after some conversations back then, we decided we wanted to do a trip together and to explore opportunities in Tanzania. So we wanted to thank Kotani Pay for that opportunity. Please do visit their website and find out what services they offer, and I think they have a great service. Thank you. So the first thing I really wanted to do, and one of the things that was behind me when I was thinking about my visit to Tanzania was I kept thinking about the possibilities that exist for gig work and for digital nomads, that people who want to take advantage of locations that are ideal physically and for various other reasons, such as technical infrastructure, accommodation, decent taxation systems. I think the list is endless, but different geographies can make decisions about how they want the economies to relate to local people with talent. and they can create environments that are attractive to these kinds of people. So when I thought about Tanzania and Zanzibar, that's the first thing that came to my mind, especially Zanzibar. Of course, later on, with interaction with some people that are part of the system already, I found out that there's obviously already some initiatives that are at work, such as Silicon Zanzibar, which we hope to probably visit and meet and interact with. But that was at the back of my mind when I was thinking about Tanzania. Now, I have to acknowledge also that a lot of my research for all of this came from interactions with various personalities on the internet and companies, organizations, whatever you want to call them. And one of them was, of course, Tanzania Startup Association. I found the interactions very useful because what I did was, of course, I did a general search for Google about Tanzania startups, but I came across the Tanzania Startup Association on Twitter. I sent them a message. They were very quick to respond, and then we had a back and forth, about who I should talk to, and they gave me a list of some of the major players in the industry. And the reason this is important is because I believe that associations are really important part of startup ecosystems, and I think also general life and employment. You need to be able to be part of a larger membership organization that has skills that you can learn from, that you can use also as well to lobby for positions, whether that's regulation or laws that come into place that may not have been thought about, that you can use associations to get more reach and to get a bigger voice, to achieve a bigger voice. And if you listen to our podcast from Kenya, when we interviewed Kirimi Mitambo, he talked about how the EdTech Association of Kenya has played a pivotal role in the development of the space. And he also mentioned how important those kinds of relationships are for startups in general. So it has just proved itself when I was able to interact with the Startup Association of Tanzania and how they connected me to some of the people that you'll be hearing from the next few weeks. So that's just one part, of course, to acknowledge the importance of that meeting and how quickly they responded. Which brings me to my second or maybe third point, which is it's so important for you as organizations to have a social media presence and to have a responsive social media presence, because you may find that you're missing out on opportunities with people that want to give you access or give you a platform by which you can express yourself and tell your story, because literally that's what most of us are trying to do, is we're trying to tell our stories and advance ourselves. So let's go into the overview of the startup ecosystem, and this was put together by Tanzania Startup Association, COSTECH, the ICT Commission of Tanzania, Botna Foundation, and Seagull Family Foundation. And this, by the way, was sent to me by Catherine Rose. She's a prominent voice in the industry, ICT industry and innovation at the tech workspace. And so she sent me this overview, which I find really useful, but I also wanted to share, see if we could break it down in one podcast episode, hopefully that you will benefit. Now, what it says is about 2020 had about maybe 247 non-startups. That picked up to almost double, plus probably maybe 2.5 times to 587 in 2021. And current number is about, then in 2022 you have about 673. Current numbers are definitely much larger, but you had 673 in 2022. In terms of geographical coverage, naturally, as can be expected, you have most of the startups are in Dar es Salaam. That's about 66.56% in Dar es Salaam. And then you have another that's kind of large is Arusha. One has 3.91 startups, percentage of startups rather. Iringa has about 2.19% of all the startups in the country. Then you have about 2.66 in Dodoma, 4.22 in Mbeya, and then the rest are distributed rather evenly, but in small numbers in the rest of the regions of Tanzania. People that study this, you can make your own conclusions about why these numbers are the way they are and how we can boost those numbers to increase them. But those are the numbers as it stands. And then in terms of the sector, the most active sector is software as a service, what some people call the SaaS, which is 25.9%, followed by agri-tech, and then fintech, and then e-commerce, then health tech, then media, energy, manufacturing comes after that, then construction and real estate, architecture, then you've got digital marketing, then you have recruitment and human resource, then you have entertainment and events, about 0.2, travel and tech tourism, that's about 3%. Then you've got edtech. Edtech is rather low. Then you've got logistics and mobility. And then under the kind of miscellaneous category, you have about 10.5% of all startups that are in that area. So of course, my concern, and for those of you that are in edtech, my concern is why the number is so small, because the need is really, really great. Then in terms of gender diversity, it's about maybe 3% women, or rather 17.2% are female-owned, 76.6 are male-owned, and then 6.3 are male-female-owned. Then according to the numbers in 2022, the Big Deal report, Tanzania startups collectively raised about 80.57 million USD in funding. The largest proportion of that funding went to the fintech sector, which makes sense, as described before. Then you also have about maybe the amount of funding that was secured by founders is about 92.3 from male founders, and then 7.7 from female founders. And so the ladies need to engage a little bit more in this space. And hopefully we'll be having some discussions about how we can change that. Then in terms of funding type, Series A was about 8.3, the seed level was about 25%, venture rounds were about 33.3%, Series C was about 8.33%, and then the amount of funding raised by grants is about 25%. Then we have some numbers about the jobs created by startups. The numbers have increased amazingly from about 32,000 jobs in 2020 to 78,000, that's about double, in 2021 to about 89,000 in 2022. So the jump from 2021 to 2022 wasn't that great. Then there's also an issue about entrepreneurship and innovation support organizations, distribution in terms of geography, where they based, and what sectors are they investing in, but mainly where are they based. So most of the entrepreneurship support and innovation organizations are in Dar es Salaam, followed by Arusha, then I guess Mbeya, or rather Morogoro, then Mbeya. Then you have quite a number in Zanzibar. You have about 5.94 in Mwanza, about 6.93 in Iringa. So those of you, of course, who are familiar with Tanzania's ecosystem and the geography and language and culture and all the social issues about the distribution of population, probably understand a little bit more about this. But of course, these numbers might change. For example, I heard that there's going to be a partnership between a university in India and the island of Zanzibar. So of course that's bound to change the dynamics of who the main players are going to be in the ESO, or rather entrepreneurship and innovation support organizations. Now, the numbers for these entrepreneurship support organizations it's split between incubators, accelerators, community, maker spaces, fab labs, and living labs. Now, there's a conversation we had in Uganda about some of our hubs, and hubs, the young man said, or someone said, that they were pretty much just co-working spaces. And I think that whereas you can make a case for that idea, but they also provide some very basic incubation and acceleration services. And what do I mean? Well, sometimes what happens with our hubs is they partner with larger groups, maybe banks, or in Uganda's case, NSSF. They have a project that they run with startups very regularly. And sometimes the rigorous process that startups are involved in to win these competitions, I think, should be considered as some sort of business incubation, although naturally incubation services consist of quite a lot, as well as acceleration services. And we obviously do encourage startups to take part or to become part of an acceleration group, because this is usually where most of the funding comes from. That people that have funds will judge a startup's success and fundability based on the idea that they've been through some kind of business accelerator. So we do encourage startups to be part of this. But the numbers are as follows. You have about 60% of all ESOs. Out of the 122 ESOs, 60% are incubators, 50% are accelerators, 49% comes from community, 19% comes from maker spaces, then 14% comes from fab labs and fabrication labs, and then 11% comes from living labs. And the report says that the percentages exceed 100% because some ESOs or some entrepreneurship and innovation support organizations usually offer multiple services. Now, in terms of the year-on-year growth and the number of entrepreneurship support organizations, the numbers were about quite low in 2010, but they've risen substantially or significantly in 2022. There was a bit of a drop in 2014. I'm not sure why that reason exists, but then there was a jump after 2014 to 2016, and been a bit of a slump between 2018 and 2020, probably related to some of the lockdowns that we went through. And then there was an increase in 2022. Now, the entrepreneurship support organizations, in terms of what they're focusing on, that 81% usually focus on the idea stage, 94% focus on the early stage of the startup, and then 61% focus on the growth stage. A very small number, which is 11%, focus on scaling, and then an even smaller number focus on the exit round, which is about 5%. Then the report suggests that the high concentration of startups in the early and the idea stages suggests a need for more support to help businesses grow and succeed, because, as we said, that there are very few that are scaling, that are participating in the scaling stage, and naturally the exit stage, because we don't have too many startups that make it to that level. Now, there's also what I suppose are called business development services, and what the report talks about is learning institutions and their participation in business development services. There's a percentage of about 35.9% learning institutions that are offering BDS services or programs. Then 64% are not offering business development services. Now, this is interesting because, again, we have conversations before in Uganda where we were talking about how that hubs in Europe, or specifically for that meeting, hubs in Germany or Saxony, usually were located in educational institutions. And we pointed out in this interaction that that there's been major shifts. Probably you can talk about disruption to where the center of innovation sometimes was shifting from traditional places such as educational institutions to other places. And this was a change that people needed to recognize. Now, the other thing that we realized also was that you really, if you look into the construction or the structure of a hub, hubs are really they're quite a varied structure. They're many different types of hubs. Just like we said, some may be based in educational institutions, others may be based where businesses are functioning, around businesses. Others may be based around the founders themselves. The founder decide we're going to set up a hub where we support ourselves and we create spaces that are of benefit to us. Other hubs may have a stronger leaning towards funding. So there are many different types of hubs, and this is something that I think is also important to note. Then they also talked about government ministries, departments, and agencies, or MDAs as they're known in these parts. And they talked about how there are about 190 MDAs in Tanzania, and these provide support to entrepreneurs both directly and indirectly. And they said about maybe 11% comes from ministries, 75% comes from agencies and institutions, and then 13% comes from government departments. Now, in terms of the funding, the numbers are about maybe 27% in fintech, 27% in agriculture, so that's about equal, 9% in retail, 9% in energy, 9% in deep tech, 9% in services, 9% in education. Then there's also a chart that talks about the active capital providers, commercial banks, community banks, microfinance banks, development finance bank, credit reference bureau, financial leasing company, mortgage finance institution, venture capital, angel investor, impact investor, private equity, and government empowered fund. That sounds a little bit like might be related to a sovereign wealth fund, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's a breakdown, and most of the active capital providers come from the commercial bank as well as the government empowerment fund. Now, in terms of the key findings and analysis, the ESOs are addressing 90% skills gap among the 800,000 annual job market entrants. Then also, there was an interesting finding that they have about the entrepreneurs who had actually accessed skills training, that 30% had not accessed training, 69% had accessed some form of training. The numbers that had not accessed training increased from 26 to 30% in 2022 from 2021. But the number that had accessed training also decreased, or rather decreased, from 74% to 69%. Now, in terms of the focus areas that the ESOs were addressing, 23% were related to business-related communities, 7% was makerspaces, 26% in accelerators, 18% in incubators, 5% in living labs, and 17% in educational institutions. And these are the providers of entrepreneurial skills. So you see that the larger number is in business-related communities, accelerators, as well as incubators, or of course educational institutions, which makes sense, at least in terms of the educational institutions. Now, in terms of the actual skill development issues, we have product development at about 34%, investment readiness at about 5%, sales and marketing at about 22%, finance and accounting at about 5.5%, legal and regulatory at about 28%, human resources at about 5%. And these are comparisons between the year 2022 and 2021. So skills that are needed for entrepreneurs, of course, there's product development skills, investment readiness, so that's a bit probably economics. Then, of course, there's sales and marketing, finance, accounting, legal, regulatory, and then human resource. So that gives you a rough idea in terms of where you can put your energies in terms of if you're providing skills to entrepreneurs. Are you a lawyer? Can you help create a system where you can help them in compliance for your startups? Are you an accountant? How can you help align their documents or what they need as startups to be able to be investment ready? You know, which is of course linked to the investment readiness section. Are you into sales and marketing, or are you into product development? Now, there's also, I guess, a comparison between local entrepreneurial support organizations and then global-based entrepreneurship support organizations. Those that are exclusively global are 16.25%. Those that are both global and local are 33%. And then the local is the largest number, which is about 50%. So that's good to know that we have, or that Tanzania has quite a number of local-based entrepreneurial support organizations. Now, in terms of what are the needs in terms of skill, the greatest number, I suppose, is investment readiness, which makes sense. And then the second one is regulatory and legal, which is a challenge to the lawyers to do a little bit more interaction. Then there is sales and marketing, finance, and finally human resource. But of course, you have to ask yourself which is the most important one for your startup. Then there's also a number on sources of funding for startups in 2022. There's savings at 36.1, family and friends at 32.7, grants at 18.9, loans from banks, microfinances at about 7.6, and then equity investment and angel investment at about 4.3. Usually, I suppose we used to be told that for a startup, you've got the 4 Fs: your friends, your family, and then of course what was sometimes referred to as fools. But those are usually the sources of your primary sources of funding. But as you can see here, that as friends and family is like 32.6%. So savings is about 36.1. Then in terms of, I suppose, capital providers, the report talks about capital providers that backed startups and fundraising in 2022. That the largest number was from savings, just as already spoken about. Then the second came from development partners. So this is so important for the country as it seeks to grow and how it interacts with its neighbors. And sometimes these partnerships with development partners do affect the startup landscape and ecosystem. Then about 21% from angel investors, and then 15% from government empowered local funds. And then commercial banks was about 4.8, and then 2.4 came from venture capitalists. Then, of course, they talk about ticket sizes. The tickets are usually amounts of money that are devoted to startups. you have at about maybe 31.25% between $5,000 and $10,000, which is about the greatest number, the biggest number of funding, usually for small tickets, or what was considered small tickets. $1 million and above is at about 3.75. And the number decreases, or the percentage of ticket size decreases as the number increases. Now, there's also a section that talks about the challenges that are faced by startups in applying for grants. One of them is a lack of technical knowledge, which is the greatest. Then process application is about 28%. Lengthy fund processing time is about 19.75%. Lack of awareness is about 18.52%. Of course, as startups, this information is important because it will help you know where your strengths or your weaknesses are and where you should be paying more attention. Of course, what also this means is then there's room for the development of your accelerators and incubators, because these are all challenges that accelerators and incubators can help startups deal with. Then there's a number here that's interesting. About 38.8 were able to raise their funds, while about 61.3 failed to raise their funds. But as we revealed in the numbers before, that for those that wanted ticket size between $5,000 and $10,000, the numbers were good enough. I suppose that 31% isn't too bad, but the numbers decreased the larger the ticket size. So maybe that's an issue about the startups themselves. Can they be trusted to deal with large chunks of money? Then challenges faced by startups in applying for equity. They talked about the competitive environment, lack of readiness, the length of investment time, which we already spoke about. But of course, there's a difference between application for grants and application for equity, applying for equity, and those differences should be highlighted. And of course, I think it's also important to get to the place where your startups understand the language. For those that I think have been more successful, they understand the language that investors speak, and it doesn't do you any harm if you have a bit of accounting knowledge and some basic economic knowledge. Then challenges startups face when applying for loans. So we've distinguished between grants, equity, and loans. As I said before, that would be an interesting conversation to have. So this is an overview of Tanzania startup ecosystem in 2022. Tanzania Startup Association, COSTECH, ICT Commission, Botnar, and Seagull Foundation. And I think it's a useful document to have and probably talk about and discuss, as well as have as a handy guide when you're developing as a founder, but of course also if you're in the acceleration space or in the incubation space, or if you're a hub providing these services. So this is pretty much going to serve as a guide for, of course, for the conversations we're going to have, but also for the future for other startup ecosystems. So I hope some of it made sense. I hope I've not bored you, but the ideas that I discussed in this document are important. So if you can, please get a download of it. I think it's available in PDF online. So thank you very much.